I turned 89 this year, and there's something I've been carrying that feels heavier than the years themselves. I used to think losing friends was just part of outliving them. That's the polite way to say it. But the truth is harder. Some of my friends didn't disappear because time took them. They disappeared because I let my pride take them first. Back then, I told myself I was standing up for myself. I said I had standards. I said I wouldn't let anyone disrespect me. I thought I was protecting my dignity. Looking back now, I can see I was slowly, quietly, destroying the very friendships that had shaped my life. My name is Whitaker. I've lived in the same house for 43 years. It's quieter than it used to be. My wife's chair still sits across from mine at the kitchen table. I haven't had the heart to move it. The mornings are slow. I shuffle more than I walk. The hallway walls are lined with photographs, faded smiles, fishing trips, weddings, men with strong shoulders and loud laughs. Most of them are gone now. At this age, the phone doesn't ring much. When it does, it's usually a doctor's office or my daughter checking in. The silence gives you a lot of room to think. And when you think long enough, you start to see where you went wrong. I grew up in the late 1940s in a small town where everyone knew your name and your business. My closest friends were boys I met in grade school. We scraped our knees on the same gravel roads and shared the same cheap baseball glove. There was Eddie, who could make anyone laugh, and Martin, steady and thoughtful. And then there was Robert. Robert and I were inseparable. We joined the service in the early 1950s, not because we were brave, but because that's what young men did back then. We wrote letters home on the same kind of paper, complained about the same food, and promised each other that when we got back, we'd build something better than what we left. And we did. We married within a year of each other. Our wives became close. Sunday dinners rotated between our houses. We built careers, raised children, borrowed tools from one another without asking twice. When my mother passed, Robert stood next to me at the funeral, silent but present. When his first child was born premature, I sat with him in a hospital hallway until dawn. We weren't dramatic men. We didn't say, "I love you." We showed it by showing up. That kind of friendship feels unbreakable when you're young. You assume time will always give you another chance to fix whatever cracks appear. The crack came in our late 40s. By then we had gone into a small business together, an auto repair shop just outside town. It wasn't fancy, but it paid the bills. For years it ran smoothly. Then the economy tightened, costs went up, and stress started living in our shoulders. One afternoon, in front of two mechanics, Robert questioned a decision I had made about buying new equipment. He wasn't yelling. He was practical. But I felt exposed. I felt corrected. Something in me stiffened. Instead of telling him later that I didn't appreciate being challenged publicly, I fired back right there. My tone was sharp. The mechanics went quiet. Robert's face changed in a way I hadn't seen before. Less anger, more disappointment. We argued after closing that day. It wasn't explosive. It was stubborn. He said I was being defensive. I said he was being controlling, the kind of words men use when they're too proud to admit they're hurt. I went home and told my wife, he owes me an apology. I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. Days passed, then weeks. Every time I thought about calling him, a voice inside me said, he should come to you. You didn't start it. I convinced myself that reaching out first would mean I was wrong. I told myself I was standing my ground. In truth, I was protecting my ego. Silence is a strange thing. At first it feels temporary. You assume it will break. Then it starts to harden. We began communicating only about business, short and formal. Eventually, we dissolved the partnership. Mutual friends tried to stay neutral. Barbecues became divided. Birthdays were missed. I remember one afternoon seeing Robert across the street outside the hardware store. We made eye contact. For a second, I almost raised my hand to wave. Instead, I adjusted my hat and looked away. I can still see that moment clearly. Two grown men pretending not to care. That was pride, ugly and quiet. Years slipped by faster than I expected. Our children grew up and moved away. Our wives stopped trying to mend things. Once the phone rang late in the evening. I looked at the caller ID and saw his name. I let it ring. I told myself it was too late to talk. The next day I thought about calling back, but by then it felt awkward. That's the thing about ego. It builds walls and then convinces you the door is locked. The irreversible moment came when I was 72. I got a call from Martin, one of our old friends. His voice was softer than usual. He told me Robert had suffered a stroke. He'd been in the hospital for 2 days. I drove there immediately. I stood outside his room longer than I care to admit. I rehearsed what I would say. Maybe we'd laugh about how foolish we'd been. Maybe we'd finally clear the air. But when I walked in, he was unconscious. Tubes, machines, the steady beeping of something keeping time. I stood by his bed and said his name. He didn't respond. I said, "It's Harold." Nothing. 2 days later, he was gone. At the funeral, people talked about his loyalty, his generosity, his stubborn streak. I listened and felt something hollow open up inside me. I realized, standing there, that I didn't even remember what we were fighting about. Not clearly. I couldn't recall the numbers, the exact words, the details that had seemed so important. All I remembered was how long we had known each other, how many years we had thrown away over something that no longer mattered. That realization didn't come with tears or drama. It came quietly, a simple, devastating thought. I chose pride over friendship. It wasn't just stubbornness, it was ego. I was afraid of looking weak, afraid that apologizing would mean I had lost. I confused humility with humiliation. I thought being a man meant never bending first. What I didn't understand then is that strength isn't about standing rigid. It's about knowing when to soften. My pride disguised itself as self-respect, but real self-respect would have allowed me to say, "That hurt me. Can we talk?" Instead, I chose silence because it felt powerful. In hindsight, it was cowardice. Now, when I sit at my kitchen table in the early morning light, I look at old photographs of the four of us, arms slung over shoulders, grinning at nothing in particular. I realize how rare those friendships become as you age. At 25, you think friends are endless. At 89, you understand they were miracles. Companionship becomes more valuable than being right. Conversations become more precious than winning arguments. Youth is loud with certainty. Old age is quiet with clarity. If you're younger and listening to this, let me tell you something gently. Being right is overrated. An apology doesn't shrink you. It doesn't erase your dignity. Most arguments are about wounded pride, not principles. If there's someone in your life you haven't spoken to because you're waiting for them to make the first move, consider picking up the phone yourself. Call them. Not because you're wrong, not because they're right, but because the relationship matters more than the scoreboard in your head. Ego feels strong in the moment. It gives you a sense of control. But years later, when the house is quiet and the chairs across from you are empty, that same ego feels very small. Time doesn't pause while you sort out who was right. It just keeps moving. And one day, it moves without giving you another chance. If I could make one phone call today, I know exactly who I'd call. I'd tell him the business didn't matter, the argument didn't matter. I'd tell him I missed my friend. But there's no number to dial anymore. That's the cost of waiting too long. When you're young, pride sounds like strength. When you're old, it sounds like silence. And silence, I've learned, can be louder than any argument you ever win.